Well, welcome to Tim's Take, and today our special guest is Neal Kinsey, and from Kinsey Agricultural Services. But our subject today, though, is Dr. William Albrecht, and Neal is one of the few people now that have had direct contact with Dr. Albrecht. His career lasted until he passed away, really, in the early 70s.
74.
So, but you were probably some of the last folks that went through his program about learning about soil fertility and to be an agronomist.
Yeah, that's right. Actually, I went through his program, and he sent me a certificate that said that I'd completed the course of study as an agronomist, but he sent a letter with it. He said, "Now, Neal, you really aren't an agronomist." He said, "You have the material to become an agronomist. If you go out in the field and work with farmers and so forth, that will determine how much of an agronomist you are."
So I believe you're about 50 years into this. Are you an agronomist yet?
I don't call myself an agronomist.
Is that right?
The reason being, most of the time if you say you're an agronomist, everybody thinks you know all about all the various parts of herbicides, pesticides, and so forth. And when I first started studying under Dr. Albrecht, I'd ask him questions about herbicides and this and that, and sometimes he said, "Neal, if you're going to study fertility, study fertility." He said, "There are just too many other things out there. You start getting into all that." He said, "There's 600 chemicals and all these combinations." He said, "You can't possibly know all that." He said, "Now, I'm not saying all these other people that say they're agronomists, maybe they were smart enough to know that, but Dr. Albrecht was a smart man. He knew my head wasn't big enough to take all that." So anyway, I just tell people I'm a soil fertility specialist because I took his advice and did what he said. Now, he didn't just say soil fertility is all that's important, but he said, when somebody got a weed problem, go find somebody that's a real expert in taking care of the weed or insect or disease. He said, you can't know everything about everything. So he said, if you want to study fertility, focus on fertility. And that was some of the best advice he gave me. I have appreciated it ever since.
I bet. Well, there's a little bit of background on Dr. William Albrecht. He came here in 1916 from the University of Illinois, where he got his PhD. And he was a soil microbiologist. He was really trained that way. And I believe he was probably one of the first soil microbiologists here at the University of Missouri, or the first. It was a small department at the time. It was really growing rapidly. And he spent the first part of his career connecting legume inoculants to the right legume, because that was a brand new science. We just learned about that. And that was really important for farmers to use the right inoculants for their soybeans or their clovers or their alfalfa. But he was very fortunate in that there were other soil scientists coming on at MU at the same time. Hans Jenny, for example, his soil chemist. You had Leonard Baver and Richard Bradfield, who were more on the studying the soil colloid. And then others like Edmund Marshall and Graham and Smith that all came. And what William Albrecht did, he learned from them too. And I think that's what's important, that he was a soil microbiologist. He soon learned that what they were talking about, the soil colloid, had a lot effect on the soil microbiology. Or the soil fertility, like Hans Jenny was doing, affected soil microbiology. And you say that he was an agronomist, maybe not so much because he didn't know about everything, but he was a true soil scientist because he understood the whole big picture of putting all this together. And that was the beauty of Dr. Albrecht, I think, is that he put everything together. And we had a discussion here a week or so ago. Was he a soil microbiologist or was he soil fertility? He's a soil scientist.
That's right.
And
That's right, he was.
And when you look at some of the great soil scientists in the world, he is right up there. He's right with them because of his accomplishments that we still see today. Like you said, he passed away in 74. I think retired in 59.
Yeah.
But his concepts are still out there. Like you see right here, that there's a series of books that capture what he was teaching you all and many other folks.
Yes, the books do a real good job of saying what he said.
Right, exactly. And he said a lot.
Yeah.
He really did say a lot. And by the 1930s and the 40s, he started putting together some concepts of how the soil not only affected the plants, but affected the animals that were consuming those plants.
He didn't just look at the soil. He looked at the soil, and he didn't just look at soil in terms of, well, how many nutrients does it need? Because he understood the physics of the soil better than I think a lot of soil physicists understood the physics of the soil.
Right.
What do you do if you don't have it? Well, nobody gave an answer if they knew the answer, but he gave the answer. Well, you correct the chemistry.
Right.
Yeah. But his degree actually there were two prongs to it. But his degree, actually, one was ag chemistry.
Oh, was it? Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So he realized back then that this was very, very important. And
you use the chemistry to correct the physics. And what was he looking for? How do you build the environment for the biology from the plant root and everything that supports it?
Because he realized that those were all interconnected.
They were, but I think he had always come right back to say the microbiology is what that's the thing that can be most affected by all these other. If we don't do everything else right, the microbiology is not going to be right.
If we don't have good microbiology, we're just not going to have a good plant.
Yep. Yeah.
It's as simple as that. And I think we're starting to come around to that today more. He was 80 years ahead of everybody else.
When back at my time, they said he was 50 years ahead of his time, and I think he was still 50 years ahead of his time when 50 years after I've been working.
Right, exactly. Well, you shared with me this article that was in the Saturday Evening Post, September 1945. So I went and got the magazine, I copied the article out, and it says, "Are we starving to death?" In 1945, he was concerned that we had depleted our soil so much of the essential nutrients that we were now depriving ourselves of these essential nutrients.
Well, even then in 1948, he made the movie The Other Side of the Fence.
Right.
And he made the same points in that movie, but so many people, that's not what we need. Even when I was studying under him, he pointed out, Neal, this was 1960, late 60s. He said, people are now saying the soil, you don't worry about the soil, it's just there to hold the plant up. We'll put on the fertilizer it needs. And this is one of the things he taught us in class. I mean, when I say class, this was more or less a study course. It wasn't a formal class like he was teaching in the university, but he still taught you.
Right.
And he said, they say, well, we don't need the soil except to hold up the plant because we can take care of everything else. And he said, they also say, the soil, all it has to be is there to hold the plant up. He said, well, let me just tell you something. He said, if you take all of the colloidal humus out of the soil and you plant a seed in it, it won't come up. He said, it will not germinate. But he said, you put just a small amount of colloidal humus on there, and then that seed will germinate. He said, soil is not by itself. We need the life in that soil in order for the seed to sprout and to grow and so forth.
It takes life to make life.
Yeah. Yep.
And that's what he was getting at. And it's not just the macronutrients; it's the micronutrients also that are so important.
And I agree with you, but my question is, how many more of them down there should we already have been looking into, but haven't because we say, well, we don't need it, we got fertilizer.
Exactly, and we've been farming a lot of our ground in this country for a couple hundred years, some in the world for thousands of years, and what we could be depleting already out of this.
You can take the soil test that Dr. Albrecht developed and start running tests on soils, and you can take a soil that's really quite fertile and just quit putting whatever nutrient on there, and you can measure as to how long it will last before it starts to go down. The longest I've ever seen it last is 10 years. And that was on phosphate and potassium, that there was so much there. It was too much. It was hurting the yield instead of helping it. For 10 years, no P and K got put on 1,500 acres. And the yield went up. But then finally, after those many years, the excesses came down to where they were the high side of excellent. And when they got to the high side of excellent, that's where the owner said, I want to stay. But in 2 years, he retired. The guy that took over for him, oh, this grows great. We don't need to put any fertilizer on. In 5 years, they had a crop failure. So from really fertile soils, and guess what he said? He said, the Albrecht system ruined our farms. Yeah, because we were telling them, now you need to start putting on fertilizer in order to raise those really good crops.
Right. And this can be commercial fertilizer. It can be organic fertilizer. It doesn't matter.
What I would say is, if you need potassium, you need potassium. And when you say it doesn't matter, well, now, if you need potassium and you're just selling bulk, whatever kind of potassium you can get is great. But if you need potassium and you're selling for taste or something like that, then you better pay attention to what kind of potassium you put on. So
the form can make a difference in taste or in sugars and
not only the form, but the amount. I mean, we work with wine grape people, and they'll say, well, we need more fruitiness in our wine. Well, first thing you look at is, do they have the right physical structure, which means the calcium, magnesium, potassium, sodium have to be in the right place. But once they have that, what you look at for fruitiness is sulfur. Most people have no idea that you look at sulfur to give fruitiness to wines. I mean, white wines or red wines, if you want a fruity red wine, but most of the time it's fruity white wine, and you can pick them out. If you get a good soil, you can pick out which ones are fruity and which ones aren't.
Do you think this is why on some are especially foods and beverages like wine and such taste different from different parts of the world or different countries or different soils? And
I think a lot of things have to do with that, including the subsoil and what's down there, because we may not be able to put any nutrients on that influences what's 10 feet down. But if the roots can get down there and there's water there and they pull up water soluble, I think that has a lot to do with the nuances of wines. But it doesn't have to do with the very best quality wines. The very best wines, when you analyze those soils, match up exactly to what Dr. Albrecht said was the very best soils. And I'm talking about the aerobic zone. And if you get out of that aerobic zone, and if you measure it, and it doesn't have what it needs, you can still do better.
That's where most of our roots are, really.
The feeder roots, the roots that go down really deep, that's what a lot of wine grape people would say to me at first. Tree crop people say, but our roots go way down. I said, what do those roots do? They pull up water. Whatever's water soluble, they'll pull some up with it. But we need more than what's water soluble. We need root acid soluble. And that's what's going to happen in that aerobic zone because of the microorganism.
Right, because in that 7 inches or so, it's aerobic, and that's where your soil microorganisms are, because that's where they live for the most part. And that's where we're turning nutrients over. That's where they're being available. So even if you took his classes over 50 years ago, Dr. Albrecht had put a lot of that together already.
Oh, he had it, and he taught it. But it's like one of the fellows that was a student, I put on a meeting one time, and I was probably in my 50s. He was about 65. He came up with tears in his eyes after that meeting. He said, Neal, I studied under Dr. Albrecht. He said, I took classes. A lot of the things you said, I heard Dr. Albrecht say. But he said, I was a student. And he said, you go there and you're trying to get that degree and you're not looking. He said, this is the first time I've ever heard this as a program. Sure. What you go out and actually do to make it work. He said, what I was looking at, well, when I was in this class, I'm trying to make an A so I can get out of that and get my degree and go on to work. He said, I never thought of it as where you put all those together. And he said, you just put all the boxes together. Well, I didn't. Dr. Albrecht did it.
Because he was doing this with rabbits and cats even, wasn't he? He was using those animals as
one of the fellows he knew. One of the guys in California used the cats, yeah. But yes, chickens, rabbits, pigs.
Because he would feed them on forages and grains that were from different fertility, different management, and then look at the animal itself, for the bone structure, to their hair, to their growth, just everything.
Yep, yeah, and wasn't afraid to say it.
Right. Did it ever get him in trouble?
Oh yeah, yeah. Not that I knew it. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't around when he really was in his heyday. I was around when after. I mean, I didn't even know Dr. Albrecht till 1967. So he hadn't been teaching since 58. He retired in 59, professor emeritus. When you say retired, he didn't.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, when I first met Dr. Albrecht, I didn't know who he was. They said, you need to talk to him. So I went to his office, and the secretary said, well, let's see when we can get you in.
So he had lots of people talking to him still.
This was 67. He was professor emeritus since 59. It wasn't a matter of lots of people. When he came in the morning, he had an appointment. And every 30 minutes to an hour was another appointment until he left for lunch. And when he came back after lunch, there was somebody there to see him all the time. Sometimes you couldn't get an appointment, even then, for 2 or 3 weeks because all of it were full.
Wow.
And
he traveled the world, too.
yes, he did. In fact, I had somebody once say, oh, that might work in Missouri, but he didn't. He just stayed in, he did his work there in Missouri and so forth. Well, I put on a meeting in South Australia, the state of South Australia. And one of the farmers came up to me and said, Dr. Albrecht visited our farm. Now, he was a kid, but he remembered his dad had Dr. Albrecht on the farm when Dr. Albrecht came to Australia.
In Australia?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. I just ran across the person the other day from Ohio. I'm sorry, from Pennsylvania. Dr. Albrecht had came and visited their farm when he was just a kid. Same thing. So he did get out a lot. And I think he, like a lot of other really good teachers and researchers, they also taught. And by teaching, it helps you start putting some things together because students ask great questions.
Yeah.
And they really get your mind going. So I think him teaching class really, really helped too.
Well, there was one of the fellows that worked under him. I didn't know until after Dr. Albrecht died, but it was Dr. Renner, Renner, I think is how his name was spelled. But went to visit Dr. Renner. He was head of the agronomy department at Southwest Missouri State College at the time in Springfield. And he had a reputation after Dr. Albrecht died and they quit teaching his principles here. They actually, Dr. Renner said the Soil Conservation Service started coming to Southwest Missouri State because they wanted people trained under Dr. Albrecht's philosophy, and Dr. Renner was still doing that.
Wow.
And he said, Dr. Renner said at the time that the day Dr. Albrecht got in trouble was on Agronomy Day. He said he gave a speech, and he said, if we corrected our soils, we wouldn't have so many sick animals.
Oh.
And he said the dean of the School of Veterinary Medicine was sitting in the front row over across on the other side from me. And he said his face went from a smile to a frown because he said evidently he thought Dr. Albrecht meant if you straighten out your soil, you're not going to need veterinaries anymore. Oh. Because he said from that day on, the School of Veterinary Medicine was opposed to anything Dr. Albrecht did. And he said, the School of Veterinary Medicine has a lot more pull than the Department of Soils.
Oh, sure.
And he said from then on, that's when, well, you stick to soils. Mm-hmm. We got a veterinary school to talk about animals. We got a medical school to talk about people. And they didn't want all those things to be connected.
But as he showed, about the same time in the late 40s, you are what you eat.
Yeah.
Because one of his classic publications was taking the dental records of Navy soldiers from World War II and correlating that back to where they came from.
Yes.
And he could tell by the number of cavities that you had or the fillings that you grew up on poor soil.
I don't know if this was actually written somewhere, but he did make the statement one time that people that came from the poor soils, their arteries would be the shape of somebody in the 70s or something like that, 70-year-olds, even though they were young,
right,
still in the service and so forth. But it looked like when you looked at that, that's what you'd be expecting from somebody that was in good health when they got maybe 70 or 80.
Because at that time you were still pretty well eating locally.
Yes. Yep.
And if we're going to eat locally, we want to make sure that we're eating good locally.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
that's right.
That the thing that I like about what's starting to come around now is it's not just a matter of let's grow food, let's grow good food. It's nutrient dense food. Well, I think Dr. Albrecht pointed out how to grow nutrient dense foods all the way back in the 30s and 40s. Mm-hmm. It's just that nobody paid attention to it.
Right, because we were on a new paradigm at that time. We were looking at different ways, more, because we need more calories, more.
I think Dr. Albrecht's approach always was this. We have the best way to treat the soil by putting back as much compost and manures and encouraging the microbiology and so forth. But we don't necessarily have all the resources so that we can do all that, because if you make a compost out of something that comes from deficient calcium soils, the calcium doesn't just magically come into that. It's still going to be, when we analyze composts and manures, if it comes from a place that the calcium's deficient, the compost or the manure is calcium deficient.
Sure.
And any other nutrients you want to take a look at. And so what he looked at was, all right, fertilizer is really a good supplement. And that's really the way he looked at it. It was a good supplement to doing what we were already doing. But by the time I was in the 7th grade, the teacher of teaching agriculture course in our class in 7th grade said, manure really isn't that valuable anymore. And one of the guys in the room held his hand up and he said, there was somebody out at the house the other day and they told Dad he didn't just give that manure away. You don't need it anymore. It costs too much to handle it. Go buy fertilizer and put that on, because fertilizer is a lot cheaper than buying manure. And, if you're looking, what's the lowest price way I can get it on, that they were right.
Sure.
Except that's only if you look at what's in there. That's not looking at what it does for the microbes to release more and so forth.
Sure.
So he wasn't opposed to fertilizers, but he felt like we needed to use all those ecological things that finally people are coming back and saying now, well, we need to do that. Well, we need to have been doing that, like you say, in the 40s and so forth.
It was, look at from the whole picture, using all your resources and using the fertilizers to supplement what you don't have.
But he was not popular because he would not endorse anything that he didn't think really was helpful to the farm.
Sure.
And, he said, yes, fertilizer's fine, but fertilizer's not going to substitute for all what we need for life in the soil. And as far as microbiology and so forth, even in the late 60s when we were talking to him, he still knew who had the best information on microbiology, because he said he even named the name at the time, but he said one of the places in Scotland, he said they put out the best information on soil microbiology of any place in the world. And that was in the 1960s. He was still keeping up.
Wow.